Hello, everyone. And if you haven't already, you guys, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, where I'm going to be uploading videos like this, well as YouTube Lives, eventually different cinematic, different comedy videos. But if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button so you can get that little ding dong when new content is being uploaded to my channel. Thank you so much, everyone. Now on to the subject of today's video, which is my awakening journey, part 3, entering the personal growth world. So kind of on the timeline of my sort of journey, we're basically now in the fall of 2018 when I moved back from Toronto to Vancouver. So the timeline of this particular video is going to be from the fall of 2018 to the very beginning of 2020. So I moved back to Vancouver and I basically enter the personal growth world, albeit through the leading and through the showing me of the way by my girlfriend in my new relationship at the time, from a woman who had been in this space for a very, very long time, living in Vancouver, was super, super connected. And she was a part of, let's put this in quotations, but like a conscious sort of pseudo-spiritual community. It was much more of a conscious community than a spiritual community, but it was the point where I started to meet a whole new sort of world and people in my hometown city, Vancouver. As I mentioned, part of the reason why I left my hometown city, Vancouver, was to pursue different entrepreneurial, business, artistic paths and pursuits that were a lot different than where I come from in Vancouver. Basically, sort of the crowd I grew up in Vancouver was very sort of upper middle class, affluent families, great upbringing, but mostly everyone, all my friends that I grew up with, are very pursuing very traditional paths. You know, everyone becoming doctors, becoming lawyers, becoming accountants, becoming business people, real estate agents, very sort of traditional avenues. And I moved to Toronto with one of my best high school friends who was also like me, wanting to pursue something different. And so now moving back to Vancouver, I was sort of brought with this fear of, okay, where am I really going to fit in? Because while I'm still great friends, a lot of my old high school friends, and have great laughs and stuff, that I was like, I couldn't really see that being my primary community anymore because I had changed a lot. I was going through these different awakenings, and I was kind of at that point in the spiritual awakening journey where it's like, who are my friends? Who's my community? Where you're changing and your relationships to people are changing as a result, right? So I was reconnecting with some old friends, but it was still kind of trying to put on like an old piece of clothing that, well, nostalgic and feels good. It doesn't quite fit right anymore. Something felt a little bit off, right? And so I was introduced to so many different sort of conscious people that were, you know, going to men's work things, like conscious communities of people who were doing fucking eye gazing, of people who were doing shadow work. It was like, what is this world, right? People are going to therapy. Everyone has a fucking coach. Everyone has a coach. And the social gatherings, you know, the type of thing where there's tea and people are sitting on pillows. You know, the type of thing where they're sitting on a fucking pillow. I've never sat on a pillow on the floor in my entire life, having a cup of tea. Everyone's got a podcast. And everyone's like, what books are you reading? So like I started reading books about psychology, started reading books about conscious relationship. I was like, what the fuck is a conscious relationship? I had no idea what any of this shit was. This is end of 2018, moving into 2019. And so I'm being just brought into this whole new world and this whole new sort of community of people in my hometown city, being spearheaded by this relationship that I was in, this was my first introduction to this space. I'm 31, turning 32. That was the first time I basically moved into any sort of conscious space, coming from more of an artist imprint and moving into this conscious space. And this is where I started reading all these different books, you know, book club with my partner, book clubs with other people, what podcasts you listen to. You start subscribing to podcasts, start walking around like I'm doing the dishes, I'm listening to a fucking podcast. It's like, who the fuck am I? Like, what is this space all of a sudden? You know, going to the bookstore, buy new books, you know, got so back into reading like when I was a kid. And then eventually at some point I become a certified love coach. I did it through the Angry Therapist, John Kim online. I did it through his life coaching program. This was 2019. I became a certified life coach. It was great, but it basically all it did was it kind of gave me the swagger to be like, oh yeah, I'm a certified life coach. I can do this, which I basically already had intuitively. And I had already started working before I became a certified life coach, because there's so many coaches out there that aren't even certified and they're amazing coaches. And so getting sort of this official certification, this felt like something I should do to maybe at the time deal with some imposter syndrome, but it wasn't really sort of necessary. And so I was doing a lot of co-creative work with my partner, again, who was already quite established. And like I mentioned, polarity dynamics were sort of fucked up because she was kind of a quasi, obviously not officially a mentor, but kind of a quasi mentor of like introducing me to this world and kind of give me that slap on the ass, like, Jamie, you're good, you're great, you're going to be really good at this. And so we co-created a lot of different things. We eventually had a podcast that ran together. And I was sort of kind of finding my voice of like, oh, I can be a coach and I can still say cock, shit, erection, which is kind of my comedy background, my artist background. And so I kind of started to find my voice a little bit. Oh, I could be this crazy, weird, over the top artist, but I could still be like conscious. And so that was kind of the early goings of trying to figure that out, right? So I became a certified life coach. Co-create a podcast with my partner. We eventually kind of had some different business things that we were creating. And I was just moving deeper into this spiritual awakening. At this point in my journey, I hadn't done any embodiment stuff. I got into doing, working with different coaches, working with different life coaches, taking online courses, reading books. But 2018, 2019, even to the very beginnings of 2020, this was all just in my head. It was all just very sort of cerebral, right? I hadn't gone down the embodiment journey, which is going to come in the next video when I started moving into this sort of stuff. But also a huge part of this was learning what a conscious relationship was. And my partner at this time, where we basically were together from summer of 2018 until about June of 2020. So during this time, I basically was existing in my first ever healthy, safe relationship. So there was a lot of healing that took place in this relationship, which I'm so grateful for that partner. While we didn't have the rom-com rip your clothes off sort of chemistry in that way, it was such a huge safe place for myself, and I know for the both of us to land to heal some different things. And this was my first sort of imprint of beginning to actually co-create a conscious container. I never experienced this before, where you talk about shadow with your partner, where you have these check-in conversations a few times a week, talking about your relationship, where you're actually doing things like healing mother wounds, healing father wounds, beginning to look at attachment styles, beginning to look at codependency. And it was like, what the fuck is this? You know what I mean? We were taking programs together. It was all that point, when someone gets interested in self-development and they're trying to devour as much content as they can, and they're learning so much, and it's really necessary, but it's still quite heady. It's quite cerebral, right? It's not this embodied experience. And at this point in my journey, I would say that it also wasn't very spiritual. It was a lot more of the psychology sort of conscious community. I hadn't really moved into like polarity and spirituality. Towards the end of this period that I'm talking about is when I really started to get into David Data. Like reading David Data books was sort of my introduction into polarity and kind of deeper spiritual practices, starting to slowly move more into the body. But at this point, entering the personal growth space, it's very, very cerebral for me. It's very much in my head. And like I've mentioned many times, a spiritual awakening. And through this period of this time, from the end of 2018 until this video, the early goings of 2020, this video basically takes us to the inception point of the pandemic. And so through that time, my spiritual awakening was very heady. And like I've mentioned, it's very different: spiritual awakening, spiritual initiation. But I was learning so much and being indoctrinated into this world. This is where, I began to really create deeper, more conscious male friendships, connecting with people online, engaging in masterminds. Well, at this point, I'm still have relationships with kind of the people I grew up with in my hometown city. I'm also beginning to foray into making different relationships and friendships with people who were more sort of moving down a similar path at that particular time, right? Having different masterminds and connecting with men at a deeper level, and really beginning to go inward and introspectively and look at some of the deepest aspects of myself in ways that I had never done before. And so at this point, this is basically where I became a life coach. It's where I became a relationship coach. At the beginning of moving to Vancouver, I was also serving part-time, but quite quickly, and a lot of this is to do with my partner at that time. And so much of it, I think what helped me to become decently successful pretty quickly was that she had this massive following online. And so she was promoting me and we were co-creating. And so if it wasn't for her, I would have had a lot harder time to move into this space and to be quote unquote a successful coach. And so quite quickly after beginning, I was able to do coaching full time, and I was a full-time coach and had a full sort of client roster, and I learned so much through her. And so this was basically me at this point was in kind of a psychology community, because I've talked about like a spiritual community feels quite different than a psychology community. And so there were so many more timelines that I was meant to go down and jump. There were so many different timelines that were meant to collapse, paradigms I was meant to shift into, but this was really my first one. And this is really where I would say my spiritual awakening really began to sort of land. Again, it was still in my head, but the reality of that spiritual awakening that really started the end of 2017, moving into 2018, when I moved back into this community, and when I moved back to Vancouver and started to be a part of this conscious community and see all these different people that were pursuing similar things to me, that were interested in similar things, had gone through similar things to me, I was like, this is a whole new paradigm. This is a whole new fucking universe. And so much of how we ground and truly embody a paradigm or a timeline, you guys, is when it gets mirrored back to us in the experiences of other people, where someone says what they're going through. Oh my God, like that's the exact same fucking shit as me. Now all of a sudden we don't feel crazy. Now all of a sudden we're like, okay, so maybe what I'm experiencing going through actually is real. And it gets reaffirmed and reestablished by other people going through similar things. And so, like I mentioned, 2017, 2018, when I was in Toronto, still doing comedy, all these health issues, working in the hospitality industry, no one I was around, absolutely no one was going through anything that I was going through. And then eventually this sort of lifeline of this woman who I eventually went in a relationship with, who was in Vancouver, was the beginning stages of sort of reaffirming these crazy sort of alterations in my perception of things, how I heard things, how I saw things. And then beginning to become a part of this community was, okay, it was a grounding of this new paradigm. So really the grounding of that big spiritual awakening that had been brewing since as far back as the very end of 2015, toxic relationship into 2016, that relationship with the born-again Christian, this was really starting to actually like tangibly have a place in reality. And it was with me becoming a life coach and relationship coach during this time and this period. I also became, actually, no, this came later. I'm going to talk about that in the next video. But a life coach, a relationship coach, podcasts, reading self-development books, devouring, give me more, engaging with conscious community and having different social get-togethers that didn't always include like going out partying and alcohol and drinking, and actually, deeply connecting with people and actually having those beginning stages of what it felt like to be part of a community, alongside having my first ever like truly healthy and safe and conscious relationship, and really beginning to explore what that was and grounding that awakening, and really beginning to find my voice as a coach, as a thought leader. I began to just meet so many people that, you know, had written books and had done TED Talks. And I was like, whoa, I'm around like all these successful people, and successful in a way of being like an author or a thought leader. It was a lot of like different thought leaders and people doing cool, interesting things that I'd never really been exposed to, coming from a community of people that I grew up with, where everyone just does traditional, people kind of do what their parents did. And so this community of people was people who really were creating life on their own terms. Everyone was like an artist of some kind, or an entrepreneur, or a speaker, or a podcaster. And I was like, whoa, this is fucking crazy. Mind was blown. And so that's basically what that time was, of me entering the personal growth world from end of 2018, moved to Vancouver, until basically the pandemic, and then everything completely shifted again. But yes, that's basically my awakening journey, part 3, entering the personal growth space, basically me becoming a coach, entering the coaching industry. I didn't even enter this space until really right about the time that I was turning 32. So that's basically where we are, moving into around the gestation of the pandemic. I'm turning, right at the time of the pandemic, turning 33. So moving back to Vancouver at 31, all the way to sort of 33 in terms of my age. That's sort of the timeline. And then the next shift that we're going to talk about, which is the doozy, the big one, which started and was altered in the pandemic, where the course of so many people's fucking lives changed. But this was basically where my first spiritual awakening, entering the personal growth space to the full-blown manifestation of my true spiritual initiation. I thought, oh, this is the space I'm moving into. And then God and Source had other ideas. And this is where things really get cranked up. And this, at the wake of the pandemic, is really where the journey began of bringing me to where I'm at now. And yeah, so that's part 3, me entering the personal growth space. Timeline-wise, we're right at the wake of the pandemic. So thank you so much, everyone, for watching this video. And we will see you next in part 4, which is titled My Spiritual Initiation.
Hello everyone, and thank you so much for watching my latest YouTube video. If you enjoyed this video, I have lots of other related YouTube content that might percolate your interest off to the right side of the screen. And if you would be so inclined to like, comment, and share this video with a friend, and of course, if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel.